All right, so as you know, I'm not Jim Gabbert. I do not have the magnetism that Jim possesses. But unfortunately, our friends at NPS could not travel. So I'm going to try to provide you with some good, insightful information to take back with you. I will say one housekeeping issue. We did have one more reviewer that could not make it today, and that's Hannah Beckman Black. She's out of our Asheville office. So I'm sure many of you all have worked with Hannah whilst she was here, and then since she's moved to Asheville. And my cat broke my glasses this morning, so I'm going to see what I can do, and hopefully they'll stay on my face if I hold myself at this jaunty angle. Anyway, good morning. Good to see everybody here. Again, I'm Jeff Smith. I'm the National Register Coordinator. I've been with the state a little over 5 years. It's hard to believe. I came, started right before the pandemic under the tutelage of Miss Beth King. I was happy to be able to come back to leave West Virginia and come to North Carolina. Went to grad school at UNCG, studied under Joe Limenstall. So Joe and Sarah were my two mentors. I actually had an internship with Edwards Pittman during the Rockingham County survey, so learned all about log and how prolific it is. Anyway, there was one handout that was out in the lobby. It's the revised submission checklist. If you did not get it, see me or Sharon after the presentation, and we'll make sure you get a copy. But they'll be posted online by the end of the day. Sharon? Nah. Sometime this week. So really just two major changes to mention. The first being we're now going to ask for a draft, specifically for databases, historic districts. We're going to ask for your draft database. I think because some consultants were submitting a draft version of their Section 7 and allowing the reviewer to look at that kind of early in the game. There they are right there. Thank you, Julie. It just kind of prevents it getting clogged up at the back, kind of towards the finish line, so to speak. So I think Lauren can speak to it, and I think we can thank Annie for that. Well, she was one of our employees, so.
Wait, what?
You worked with Dan Pizzoni and reviewing the inventory early on in the game, so he said it was very helpful to review the Section 7 inventory before the final gets submitted. No, you're allowed 3 questions today, Annie, so use them sparingly.
Did I get 3 questions yesterday too, and can I use my leftover 2 questions?
No, that was yesterday.
So the change now is we have to submit the draft database with a nomination?
Yeah, everything, it comes in with that first draft. The first submission, it's like with everything all at once.
So if we put all of the information.
It doesn't all have to be in there. It just needs to be a draft database, like all the drop downs, things like that are in that architectural data table. That does not have to be filled out at that time. We're looking mainly at the text, the description.
So if we make changes in the nominations based on your feedback on Section 7, then we have to go back and make those changes into the database as well.
Correct.
So we kind of have to do the database twice.
Go right ahead.
All right, so let me get up there on the microphone so the recording can hear. So the concept, and this is laid out in a, I think it should be, is it linked on the new? Okay, it's linked on the new checklist. The idea is that if you submit a nomination and your database at the same time, we will, but don't, okay, do sort of the top half of the database, the drop downs, the blanks, the fill in the blank parts, and then do your section 7. And we'll review the top half of the database and your section 7. You'll get corrections back from us, and then you can just cut and paste from your section 7 description into your database, into the narrative description, and then that's all, that's done. And we will not touch the database again. We will not touch your section 7 again.
Okay, so that makes it clearer.
Sorry.
And that's what I was hoping you were saying, 'cause it sounded like you were saying enter the text in the database and then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's laid out hopefully clearer than mud, but maybe not, in a link on the, within the checklist on the website. So, yes.
I find when I'm having to put stuff into the database, I've had to first reteach myself Access because I hadn't used it since it came out in 2000. But also, I'm doing it backwards from what you're saying. I'm like filling out everything from the form and then filling in the comment section, and then I'm exporting to an Excel spreadsheet and then doing a mail merge from that.
Oh, Lord.
Where I can actually, it's really nicely because it's the mail merge, and then you've got like all your like fields where you want them to be formatted for section 7. And so I'm just curious, like when I refer to like the database, like input, and I wonder if it'd be helpful to also have maybe some information about getting the information from the database to section 7. Or am I the only one that works that way and doesn't go from section 7 into the database?
I mean, if you can make it work, Susan, then do it. But
Yeah, I was going to say mail merge is beyond me. Sharon can attest to that. Yes.
I don't write nominations, but what is being described is how I would do it if I did.
well, there you go.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
how I would do it.
And would that end up, so Beth is saying that's how she would do it if she was writing a nomination herself. Mm-hmm. And would that end up with a way that we look at the narrative description in the inventory list and make edits that we can do all, we've been trying to figure out a way to own, that you all and us only do all of that once? And does that still allow for that?
I think as long as you go back and edit the database and then extract again. Yes.
Right, and see, that's what I'm trying to only do is basically do that once.
My
But,
workflow, I basically like sit down and do all the database. Of course, I television stuff anyways, but I do the database. So actually, I'll be sending you Aquan Park and McCrory Heights hopefully this week, Jeff. And so I've got like everything in the database. I don't want to go back to it unless I'm gonna make edits. Other than that, it's done. And so that way, I guess you would do edits in the database, and then I would just re-export it to put it into the form.
into the National Register form.
Yes, I would export it to the Excel, which also is great for quick reference.
I mean, if you wanted to, if you can magic that, by all means. That's I'm like, I need to cut and paste.
I was actually doing like this weird workaround or something that, like, there's gotta be an easier way, but.
I mean, I don't know that this crew is the most technologically savvy, and I realize that Excel and Access is not super advanced, but that's where we are.
I was just gonna say, I mean, I'm still looking at the hard copy of the bulletins.
Yes,
So
yeah.
That's what you're dealing with.
So, yeah,
I mean, I
so,
embrace technology, but it's
Yeah.
not to say that I know it, breathe it.
but if you sort of do half your database and the other half of your database, but as your inventory list, and then just cut and paste, or if you know how to do the mail merging and the back and forth.
We were
Yeah.
just saying the formatting, I mean, like you can't spell check in and things like quotation marks and italics or whatever don't translate, so it, to us, makes more sense to write in Word,
Yeah,
cut and paste it in.
yeah.
However, the way you've described it, Sarah, works also for your system, because you would just edit in the database and extract again.
Mhm.
So there's
Yeah.
really not any
Yeah.
reason to.
And
Change
also, if I have to go back through the whole inventory to, fix some maybe quotes and stuff, that at least then can work in with my general edits that I'm doing there anyways. Like, oh, I forgot to put in a date here, which means what needs to do. So.
Yes, Josie.
Just to clarify, so the database submission with the first draft is true for districts and individual properties, or just districts?
Just district.
Just district.
Okay.
Yep, Annie?
So, does that then mean that not nice.
You can ask as many questions as you want.
So does that then mean that the review time for the National Register nomination for that first draft is going to include y'all's review of the top section of the database as well? Because normally I think the way we were doing it before was we submitted the database on the back end with like our second or final draft. And we didn't have to then wait for that, for your comments. So we have to anticipate, depending on the size of the district, added review time for you to also look at the top section of the database.
Yes, I don't know that it adds tremendously. Beth, would you say that just not just, but looking at that, the drop downs and such, that can move fairly quickly?
I think it takes the same amount of brain power as reading the narrative summary, and you're just like, okay, so it's a one-story house, yep, I agree with that, and there it is in the database. So I think from our perspective, we were doing everything twice, because we
Right.
were reading a narrative summary, and then months later, we were reviewing short text fields.
Right.
Yeah, so we're gonna do it one time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Hold on, Lauren, did you have something to
I was
add?
just gonna say, I did this for it's like the only district nomination I've reviewed recently, and because you're reading them side by side, you have like the district, the database open on one end and then the section 7 on the other, you're just going back and forth, basically, checking as you go. And it didn't add that much time to review, honestly, and it allowed you to catch things quickly. So if there was a discrepancy with, like, say, calling something one style in the database, maybe a reviewer has a particular term or a consultant has a particular term they like to use, maybe it's from a different region or whatever, but it doesn't coincide with the drop downs. Just having that consistency and being able to see across the board, like, oh, we need consistency between what's in section 7 and what's in our database. Using those terms and things like that to standardize across the nomination. It's much easier to spot that on the front end. And then you weren't reviewing it on the back end, meaning that once all the stuff is in, we presented it at NRSC, you're not having to go back, like Beth was saying, and basically redo the work that you've already done. I'm sitting there reviewing it, and then you might catch something, you're like, well, crap. So we should have this term standardized across this nomination. I didn't catch it in my review the first time, but now it's a problem. We're not gonna go back to a consultant and say, hey, go fix this term, this is incorrect, or whatever it is. So it's much easier for us to find issues if there are issues. And honestly, like I said, you just have it open, you're just going back and forth as you're reading each property. And it really doesn't add too much time to your review, and it just saves us a lot of time on the back end and make sure that we have time to review those databases so that they actually get integrated and any corrections are made and stuff like that. So it makes our lives easier, and it hopefully won't add too much additional work to y'all's, or too much additional time to your timelines. Ideally.
Cynthia, were you?
When we're submitting the database for the draft, we're not printing any of it.
Correct, yes. No. Yes.
So we fill out the top half of the database, but do we also fill out the DNA form for the first draft?
Ooh, with the DNA form.
Is there a reason not to?
Yeah, I was gonna say, is there a reason not to? I mean,
That's just all the check boxes.
yeah.
And it could just be your goody paragraphs pasted into the narrative description.
I don't know if you heard Beth, it can just be sort of like your summary paragraph from your introduction that you could put in there for the DNA.
But if we're not submitting narratives, like if we're gonna get edits on that summary paragraph with the first draft, I mean, if following the same process for the rest of the right view of the database, we would not include the summary paragraphs with the
Well,
first draft.
yeah.
Okay.
It just, yeah, I don't know if I just asked the question I was gonna get answered, but I find that like my narrative description in section 7 versus the comment section that's in the database is not always the same. I guess it depends on the district I'm doing. Like one district required more background, so it was associative history of people, whereas the other one was mostly just about architecture and community planning and development. And so when I would export over, I would have to go through it, edit, and make it more uniform in my structure of how I was describing stuff and pull out all this other stuff. And I would find it actually useful if there was like a box for like the narrative description that would go into section 7 and then the more comprehensive piece. Because like for instance, one of the properties is a local landmark, and so it's got a whole lot of information already to it, but I'm not putting that into my district nomination just because it's not really necessary, so.
So, yeah, so I guess that's really, if you're, we would like, doing it this way would make your database and your section 7 entries match. And if you have more information that you want to include in your narrative, in the database, but it's not something you need or want in the nomination, because certainly I can, imagine that, you can add that to the database. And you could put it in that narrative field, but just have your entry part at the top and just put the rest in there after. Yes, Sybil.
Question on photos. I've been using ShareFile, but do you still want that on a separate thumb drive or whatever when a draft is submitted? Whichever's, I mean, I can do either way, but.
I mean, if ShareFile is something that you've used and Chandria is okay to continue using it in that regard, I'm fine with receiving it that way. We're just trying to make it, I mean, ultimately, there'll be some hiccups until it kind of becomes second nature, but this is all to kind of expedite the review process, believe it or not. And so far as individual properties, we just ask that you fill out the field data form, and there's a link to that as well to Beth's practical advice on how to fill out that form. It's basically replacing the old green form. For those, I think Jennifer Martin made reference to the yellow form yesterday. So anyway, any other questions? I think the only other change is just basically we tried to make the checklists appear, like the items in the checklist appear in the same order. Yes, Susan.
I tend to find that I get confused on which document I need to reference for how to do a procedure. For instance, I've been told to use practical advice, but I've also been told to use the architectural survey manual as well too when doing evaluations, and I get confused, and I guess I'd like a little guidance on what takes preference.
So practical advice only exists right now for survey. I don't feel like practical advice for National Register is necessary because you have bulletins, and our office doesn't really require that much customization, if you will. I mean, I think that's why the checklists can kind of stand alone. They tell you what we need and why it's being submitted. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I mean, if you're doing a survey, then you're going to be using the survey manual, and you're going to be like survey. I mean, those are all on a different web page than National Register.
Okay, I just have survey stuff, or like, I think it was like, was it photo naming or, I don't remember off the top of my head. But I've been told to look at more than one document, and I haven't had the privilege to do a survey yet, I'd like to, but for National Register at least, I've been referred to more than one document. So are you saying that really the NPS publications are our first go-to, and then mostly the submission checklist with maybe like the photo maybe in those areas are that are like secondary tier?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's, that's just kind of, there are other web pages or links to other web pages within the National Register website, like how to prepare a National Register nomination in North Carolina. There's references to the photo policy, which the Park Service revised, really just in name only, because it now meets both the NHL and the NR requirements. And they just said, slapped a new effective date on it. Trying to think what else.
If you've done a nomination for a district, you have had to do survey work, unless that survey was brand new or
Okay.
something. Yeah. So that's why.
Well, that makes sense then, okay.
I mean, things like, the overlap comes in things like how you label NR photos as opposed to how you label survey photos, and the survey photo labeling ties into a nomination because they're just survey files.
Mhm.
And the only difference with the NR are the photos that go up to DC are labeled a different way, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And they're smaller in number.
Yeah.
So like if you have a district, you have like hundreds or however many photographs, but what gets sent to DC that needs to have that NR label is gonna be, 5 or 10 or 20, whatever your photograph set is.
I will admit the light is blinding, so Annie?
Are you all internally still using that review matrix that you created in 2020-ish? Or is that out of use? I'm wondering about your internal processes for consistency among reviewers.
It's there to rely on if the reviewer wants to look at it for the technical and substantive checklists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But reviewers may not use it or may not complete it the way we were completing it 5 years ago.
I don't believe so. No. I mean, so I perform or conduct the technical checklist or technical review as soon as I get a nomination and log it in. I'm looking at maps, I'm looking at photos, whatever, anything other than the nomination itself. And then I save everything to the network and then let who I suspect might be the reviewer, depending on workload and that sort of thing. I mean, first I'll look at their region and if they have some room to take on something else. But just because Hannah's in the West doesn't mean that she won't necessarily look at a property in the Central Piedmont, just because the volume. Although Lauren's area has been a huge uptick in the amount of nominations recently, so. But I mean, they are there if it would help the reviewer. I mean, I'm certainly not going to say don't use that, because I know a lot of work went into it. But they don't have to use it. It's just there for them to use if they want, if it helps. Ma'am, I don't know your name. Who are you?
Something I'm curious about, just in what you were saying, when nominations come in and you check all these different things first, and then you send it to whoever, to the reviewer of your choice, and they start doing the draft nomination. But what I thought I was hearing a few minutes ago was on some of the stuff that those checklists and different things and the forums and stuff were being done at the same time as the draft stuff. I mean, it sounded to me like stuff was being done at the same time as the draft, but now it sounds like stuff comes into you and you're checking off some of those things. I mean, it sounds like a contradiction of what's being done when.
I don't know.
Maybe I'm just mishearing.
Like I said, when I get a nomination in, go ahead, Ellen.
About like what happens, I hand you a nomination, pretend it's perfect, what happens?
I use Steam to open up the mailer so as not to damage the content. So I rip into it like a Christmas morning. I look to see what's in there, look at the transmittal summary, which is the checklist to make sure what is checked is inside of that mailer first and foremost. And then take the disk or flash drive, whatever, and then I start uploading the documents, whatever you want to call it, to the network, including the draft. Now, do I look at the draft? We're discussing options of a new approach, all with the target of meeting that 60-day requirement to get comments back to you all quicker, meaningful comments. I don't know if that answers your question or not, Laura. Tomorrow's another day, right, Scarlett? I thought I saw a hand. I know it wasn't Annie's, though. Yes, Josie?
So I just want to be sure we're clear what you mean hard copy versus digital components of. Right now I basically err on the side of both always, but are there certain things that you don't want hard copies of? I only see on this list now hard copies specified for the registration form, the working file, and the proof sheets, but you want hard copies of all the maps as well, right?
Yep. But the first draft is usually the only time that we require those unless there were changes made to the map at some point during the review process.
And are you also happy to have the digital formats of all of the maps, and you want all of that initially, right?
Yeah, actually, Annie made a good point because that was mentioned kind of in the front matter that digital and hard copies were required, but because it wasn't on the checklist itself, people were missing that. So Annie, I'll give you one bonus question for that. But yeah, so digital is ideal, digital and hard copy. Hey, Claudia. Another one of our reviewers, Claudia Brown.
I have a question about, it says, you want the working file with all the research materials in it. So does that mean all the research materials are printed out, or can they be on a thumb drive? Because I know I get some reviewers have given me all their research materials on a thumb drive.
That predates me. I'll use that as a cop-out. I'm okay to accept it digitally, but we have to print out. That's one of Sharon's responsibilities. So if we get both, that's even better. The whole reason behind that research material is if you're using a web-based only source, like it's a website, it does not exist in Monograph or Gray Literature or anything like that. What if that website dies and it doesn't automatically feed to the Internet Archive? Well, then that way we at least have the material, the data was accessioned, that sort of information, to kind of get an idea of when that source kind of stopped existing on the web. Yes, Annie?
Do you want every website that we might have used for a single fact? I mean, some of our nominations, one I recently have done, has a whole lot of web links for random little pieces of information that I had to aggregate to create a narrative. Do you want every website with for every single fact, do you want that material in the working file?
I will defer to you because I mean personally, like Sarah said, these nominations become part of the canon of architectural history. So, it just depends on how important was that source. I'm not gonna nitpick something like that, but I think from a librarian / archivist point of view, I would want to see everything that you use. But again, I only have so many hours in the day to where my squishy matter just dries up. Yes, ma'am.
So, the working file actually, I think, gives me the biggest headache in a draft submission, which probably sounds a little cuckoo, just because I'm like, do I have enough? Do I have all the right stuff? Like, I had planned on hand delivering my working file just because McCrory Heights is this big.
Yeah.
Print it out.
I've seen them.
So I would love some further clarification in our any advice, practical advice, any publication that y'all put out of a minimum of what you want physically for a working file.
I'm sorry,
What you want physically printed versus what is acceptable digitally. I mean, just because that clarification, I think, would just help so much. Like, I've gone through just a toner and my own printer trying to print out all that stuff.
yeah.
And that's a lot for just my printer at home. So
I think the working file, what the concept is from back in the day.
Yes.
And so let's say you're doing a nomination and you get to see a historic photograph, or I mean, they might even give it to you, but
Yes.
you've made a picture of a picture or something like that. Particularly those things that are in someone's private collection, a letter or something like that. It's not in a public archive. That's the type of thing that should go in there. Maybe some sketch maps, some things notes you were taking, interviews, when you're talking to somebody. That sort of thing is what's particularly important to get in there. Mary Ruffin.
Well, with that in mind, does that mean that articles that are from the News and Observer from the 1920s, that you all can go downstairs to the second floor and get on microfilm, I can stop printing?
What was the question?
Well,
What
if
about?
Sarah says that the importance is getting pictures that maybe aren't in the public realm or interview notes, but like an article from the News and Observer from the 1920s, where you all need to get on newspapers or go down to the second floor and see in archives, I just don't see the point of printing that.
I mean, I'm not going to the second floor. I'm not going to go down and pull something off.
But I mean, it's something that's readily available, not only in archives, but on the internet. It's not like a photograph
Right.
that a property owner let me see that may, get thrown out when they die and the kids clean out the attic.
So, I mean, back to Jeff's point, we're not, that's going to be a little bit for you guys to curate as to what should go in there.
But see, the problem with that is it becomes very arbitrary and capricious.
What,
And we
but
don't have a bright line of what you need to turn in and what we don't.
So
I think
think
that's
of-
what we're all looking for.
Think about if you had questions about, some aspect of, the Julie Smith house that was not addressed really in the nomination, but you think it might be, maybe it's something they heard about or looked into, and you go look at the working file. What would you want to see in there as someone kind of coming at it from maybe some other direction than what the preparer did? But certainly we can work on guidance and get really specific about what goes in there.
I'm gonna jump in front of you real
No,
quick,
you're
because
good.
I wanna go to the higher question. In this day and age, why are we not just fully digital? I'm not a librarian or an archivist, so I'm just curious why we even print a single thing out.
So we have currently and continue to treat our digital files as backups or as copies, and that the hard copy file, that's the archival record for us. And that's where we are. That's the decision we've made internally. Does that mean that one day we won't go to entirely digital? you know, we might, right now, the leadership, is really into paper. So,
I mean,
Jennifer.
I was just gonna say, out of all the years I've been doing nominations, no one's ever made a comment about my working file, so I just wouldn't really sweat it too much.
Yeah,
And I'm not gonna put in every source that I've already footnoted in my working file. I'm gonna put sketches and an interview with grandma and, again, photos, stuff I might copy at the local library that, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Don't overthink it,
mhm.
because again, no one's ever said, Jeff's never said to me, your working file's a little slim here,
Yeah.
what the heck's going on? It's
Yeah.
just not gonna happen, so.
Yeah.
I guess the big
Bigger
question
picture.
is printing, what we need to print versus what we can provide digitally
Right.
is
And-
really it.
And see, I think the working file was developed when you and I are making photocopies at the library, which you probably are, hopefully, still doing some of that. When you go to the library in your local community and look at something, whatever that, you know,
Now
vertical
you take a
file.
picture with your phone.
Well, that's true. So then you're back, to, do you print it? And that's versus, you know, running the copier at the library for 10 cents or 25 cents a page or whatever, you know, whatever it was. So again, we can work out some, you know, some more definitive guidance on what should go in your working file. I don't want to diminish it by kind of saying, don't worry about it. But to Jennifer's point, you know, and to Jeff's point about time-wise, in a way, don't worry about it. It really is geared toward that site-specific or process-specific stuff that you generate. Again, it might be a little sketch drawing you did of the mantelpiece. It might be a site plan you sketched out, but it's not really your final, but it's got all your notes on it. Notes from when you talked to grandma. You know, a copy of the picture of grandma propped in her basket in front of the house when she was a baby, or whatever it was, you know, that you use that's really specific to that resource and to your process for dealing with that resource. Yes.
Specific to that resource, but also difficult to otherwise obtain by a
Yes.
future researcher.
Yes, yes. And in fact, I'll give you an example from myself. When Preservation North Carolina was working on the front porch of the Graves House, which they moved for their headquarters, that's the 2-story building in that little pier they have now. They were trying to reconstruct the porch, which had been replaced, I think, in the 20s. And the nomination said that there was a photograph that showed what the old porch looked like, and the nomination described what the old porch looked like. And so P&C said, who wrote the nomination? Oh, Sarah wrote the nomination. Sarah, where's that picture? And I said, I don't know, that ought to be a footnote. No footnote. I was like, oh, okay. I said, well, let me see what's in the working file. Go downstairs, hadn't put it in the working file. And I said, I don't know. I said, I remember seeing it. I can visually remember being in the woman's living room, in the house. So it's in her personal collection somewhere, and who knows where that's gone to. Did not do that. You know, so that stuff really is important, and sometimes it will come back to, sometimes bite you personally directly. So.
All right. Anything else? You know, we're happy to take questions, or I'm happy to take questions as you work through this, as you become accustomed to this. But on to, let's see. So I guess, like I said, in lieu of Jim's attendance, Jim Gabbert, I thought I would just kind of mention that the Park Service has been, or the National Register section, has been, I think, you know, really good about sending out these best practices, which I send to anyone who's on the consultant email distribution list. If you're not receiving those, let me know, and I'm happy to add you to the list. I think they're invaluable. You know, they're the next best thing to a white paper. but until some of these bulletins get revised, and I mean, the pace at which, or the duration that it took them to revise Bulletin 38 about traditional cultural places, these best practice reviews are probably going to be the next best thing. But I mean, you know, they're not watered down. I think they have good information, solid information that's useful. In addition, on their, I guess, their guidance webpage, you know, there's things that I come upon for the first time. I'm like, oh, this would be helpful to know was out there. So, you know, not only do they have most of the bulletins digitized, but there's also white papers, policy clarifications, like map guidance and their photo policy. There's also sample nominations, which as they, the Park Service, become more stringent about, I guess, a return to the use of what their deputy chief, is that Sherry Freer's title? Either way, she's kind of, I guess, beneath the keeper, Joy Beasley. She referred to it in a TPS webinar as regulatory language, which I didn't think we were regulatory. But regardless, it's basically, according to Jim, it's the language that is in the bulletins. So, so there's nominations for amendments, archaeology, areas of significance, cemeteries, common resources, which usually get listed through an MPD, comparative analysis, which I will encourage you all to read about that, because that is becoming something that Jim is going to be looking very closely and scrutinizing. Discontiguous districts, and then several of the criteria considerations. And again, if you go to their website, it's nps.gov/subjects/National Register, and then guidance. That's where you will find, there's a ribbon that has all, and then guidance will drop down publications and white papers, et cetera, et cetera. So, and if I didn't, you know, I'm not a PowerPoint kind of person, not to slam people who love them, but I just find it easier to talk. So anyway, if you need any of this, email me. I'm happy to share it with you. Question?
Can you give that site,
Yeah.
again?
It's www.nps.gov/subjects, plural, /National Register, all one word, /guidance.
Jeff,
Yes.
there's a lot of good information there. I just had all these papers and updates. But recently, I was reviewing a nomination. Heather Slade here?
No.
I was reviewing the nomination that had been funded, it was funded with a grant, NPS grant. So before we got to the final, Jim took a look at it. And he sent, one of his comments, when you're filling out the fill in the blanks, the style, the categories and all, he said, use the correct terminology.
Yeah.
And there was a sheet that they sent out a few years ago. It's not on that portal, it's not on that site. And I had to dig and dig, and I finally found it in the South Carolina HPO.
Yeah, I was not aware of that update at all.
And they had their site was guidance on how to compare nominations. And at the end, there was an appendix. And it said this was distributed by NPS in, I don't know, 2015 or something. And there it was, the sheet with all the updated style categories and new ones added.
Well, we'll be sure to share that. Like I said, it was new to me, but It kind of, and speaking about architectural terminology, so the last thing that I'll bring up is, it was a bit of a rant. But it could be called observations. It's probably a little bit gentler term, but again, it kind of goes back to using the language that's in the bulletin. So when you're making a claim under criterion C for it's not just for architecture. There are 4 different prongs, if you will, to that argument. So you kind of look through which of those 4, I guess, requirements, prongs, whatever you want to call it, does that building fit into? Is it a form? Does it possess the distinctive characteristics of a style? So that's the language that he's going to be looking to see. And again, I would just be mindful of how things are worded in the bulletins and just, I don't know, copy and paste, but be quite literal. But it's, I guess, Jim sent an example of a good nomination. Not to say that there's not plenty of good nominations that come out of this state, but one recently out of Tennessee was for a bungalow. I'm not going to read it. I can if you want me to, but there is an introductory paragraph, which should be just that, an introductory paragraph. And then you get into your setting and description, and then your inventory, if you have an inventory. And again, it's going to vary based on your resource. But I think it's just like I said, it'll be interesting to see how, ultimately what we're trying to do is prevent a return. And I think that's, I don't know how to state it other than that. And, if you see our guidance becoming more strict or, kind of pinpointing specifically to a place in the bulletin, that's kind of, I think, is what's motivating the reviewer for making those comments. Yes, Jen?
Is the Tennessee bungalow example you received also on the Park Service's good example website, to where if you tell us the name, we could just go read through it, kind of see what they're zeroed in on, or is it not on that website?
I don't know I think it's still so new, but I can tell you it's the Fox House in Tennessee.
Okay, do you know what county?
Holly Barnett wrote it. And it's nothing really, it's a good looking bungalow. It has great integrity. I was kind of surprised that it was individually eligible, but yeah, maybe it's what Tennessee has. But anyway.
Is it Fox Construction, Jeff, or is it?
Sorry?
Is it Fox Construction, or is that like somebody's last name?
No, it's just called the Fox House.
And it's Fox, like the animal?
Just checking.
Is there any other?
I don't know.
FACH, Fox. Yeah, Fox, like the little critter. I'm trying to think anything else. There's, we see lots of work of a master claims that really do not stand up to scrutiny. Again, time was not on our side to kind of for a go back and forth between Jim and I before, for me to keep doing my job as well as plan for this, and then for him to also provide examples. But I think there are a good many mid-century master architects. So I'm asking for more information on that. So how do you prove that? Because I think, we've got already 2 Lowenstein houses listed in the register. There's a gentleman down in Salisbury who is quite prolific. So we'll see. There's always more information to come. I don't know if yes, Debbie.
This is sort of off topic, but I missed yesterday, so maybe it's a more survey question. Speaking of mid-century and later in ER, we're looking at 1980, for God's sakes.
Frightening.
And I lack the vocabulary to talk about these buildings, and these aren't fabulous buildings. What we do in ER is a lot of stuff that isn't ending up eligible, certainly will never be nominated, but is your office starting to think about a preferred vocabulary for, like, we'll shoot it around our office and say, what are we calling this? How do you describe it? That would be really valuable to us as consultants, for you guys to say, here's, for the next 2 decades, are words and ways to describe buildings that we will consider standard in North Carolina. That would be very helpful.
I feel like we have the same issue with stone buildings, even into the 70s.
Well, yes.
That we don't have any sort of regular guidance or context.
If you look at the Virginia SHPOs, they have 2 Commonwealth Style Guide and the New Dominion Style Guide that go up into the 1970s with standardized forms, descriptions, dominant characteristics, even for sort of like, Pizza Huts and stuff like that. So they've got 2 publications through their SHPO's office that have a lot of good language, and I use
there's a ranch house context in Georgia that we have used a lot that's really detailed and gives you names for different ranches, but we're getting way beyond that now.
It's pretty good.
Good.
What are the things in Virginia called?
The Commonwealth Style Guide, and I think the New Dominion Style Guide, but if you just go to their SHPO's page and type Style Guide, you ought to be able to find them. They have 2, one's sort of like chronologically earlier than the other. I forget what they're called.
Hold on one second, Annie. Josie, did you have your hand up?
No.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yes, Annie.
You had mentioned you're trying to prevent things from getting returned from the NPS.
Yeah.
Have you gotten nominations returned from NPS within the past couple of years? And if so, can you share why they were returned so that we know that as well?
There have been a few. One was for a historic district, and one of Jim's comments was about be mindful about distinct entities. Like basically he has a problem with residential districts that go from 1890 to 1950. And I'm like, well, what if it's an organically grown neighborhood that wasn't platted, it just kind of occurred? He didn't respond to that. But I'm not faulting him or slamming him. It's just a lack of time. But he thought that it wasn't eligible just for architecture, but also for community planning and development. But there's also been mixed messages about community planning and development. When I was working in West Virginia, our reviewer was a landscape architect. So she said, if you don't have a plat map, you don't have a planned community. I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. But yet, at any rate, that's not universal across reviewers of the Park Service. So I would encourage you to read the most recent issue of the best practices, because it speaks to community planning and development and using that area of significance. Trying to think what the other review was. It was a building that was altered over time. They were just basically, it was a commercial enterprise. They were trying to keep up with the times, as most businesses do. Have a fashionable facade to kind of lure people in to say, we've got the latest and greatest, And so basically Jim's feeling was that it just wasn't a strong candidate under architecture. So it's just a simple matter of kind of finessing the, or restructuring Section 8. Yes?
So, following up on that, I think if, let's say you have 3 areas of significance, you have architecture and commerce and government. And you've got, I'm thinking of a particular potential historic district not in this state. So the courthouse is the earliest building and it remains a, you know, people are coming to the courthouse town. So the significance extends from the early date on. But then architecturally, the courthouse and a few subsidiary court buildings are the only buildings from this earliest period of time, and then there's a 30-year gap before other surviving buildings were built. Are you looking for specifying a different period of significance for each of those areas? Of the government, you might say 1840 to 1960, whatever. But architecturally, you might say 1840 and then 1870 to 1960.
I mean, it's certainly possible to have those disparate periods of significance. I mean, I would, sorry?
Is that expected, or it just depends state by state? We've been asked to do that, and normally I would just have the longest period of significance on the period of significance line. But what we've done is when we list the areas of significance in parentheses for architecture, we said 1840 and then 1870 on up. But for government, the whole span of time, and for commerce, 1870 up to the end date. It's a confusing thing when there's one line for period of significance.
I will say this, Marvin. I mean, each of the criterion kind of have different approaches to bringing out that, defining the period of significance. And there's an inset box in Bulletin 16A that talks about how to select your period of significance, whether it's 1 year, whether it's 4 years. Claudia, not to put you on the spot, but Taylorsville, was that about the courthouse and the downtown?
Well, the courthouse is the newest building in the district, brutalist courthouse, which I understand is coming down now. But I think we had just one, I don't think we broke it as place, no?
Josie and Clay co-authored that nomination.
I don't think we had discrete periods like that. I think it was just one
long continuum.
But we also had, it was from the earliest commercial building, and there weren't big breaks like that, like Marvin was describing. And in fact, the courthouse, as I said, is the youngest building in that district.
I will say this much, and then I'll shut up. Inconsistency from the Park Service is a little frustrating. I don't know if that will change. I hope it will, but I also hope that they don't become so hard-nosed about a field that, anyway, this is my hope. I would consistency, because it's hard to pass that on to y'all. It's like, well, here's their kind of wishy-washy comments. I mean, if we do get a return, I will send it to the consultant and say, unfortunately, this has come back, and here's why, and we work together to get it resubmitted. But hopefully I'm not Jim. I wish he had been able to attend, because he has far greater pearls of wisdom to pass on than I do. But do you want me to continue with the study list, or do you want to do Hannah's presentation? Or?
Yeah, why don't you, here, let me just say one thing.
Okay.
So Hannah, at the last time we did this, Hannah had a presentation about making your maps for National Register projects. And she couldn't be with us today, so I was going to give that presentation for her. It's very short. It's the exact same one from the last time. So I'm going to let, because we are starting to run a little short on time, and I'm hungry, and y'all are probably hungry.
I'm on.
So I'm going to let Jeff carry on with his study list discussion. And I can just email you Hannah's, her script and her PowerPoint presentation. It's very, I think it's very easy to follow and clear. And I'll see if I can find even the clip of her making this presentation from the last time, because it was recorded. It's somewhere out there. I'm sure Matt will help me. Matt, I should recognize Matt Zayer, by the way. He's our AV tech guy who helped us yesterday and today and helps us with all our NRAC stuff that's online. Anything that's online from our office, Matt has helped us with, and he is invaluable.
Yeah, for sure. I was telling Josie earlier that it was interesting. It was the person that succeeded me in West Virginia polled the National Register Coordinator listserv about what version of their meetings, like, are you in person? Are you virtual? Blah, blah, blah. Do you have a hybrid? And I was shocked by the number of states that are now completely virtual. And it certainly, it's kind of like when you return to work. It's like, that interaction is, I personally don't get that with my cat, because I know I'm the lowest man on the totem pole in my domicile. But anyway, that's just kind of a little interesting little fact. But it's, Matt certainly helped us out to learn. Jen was in with us at that time, and we were learning how to even navigate these online meetings. So, yeah, we've come a long way, baby, as they say. Anyway, I will make this quick. So study list, I don't know. I would dare to say we get more from individual property owners than we do from consultants, but certainly y'all submit them. They are codified, is that the right word, in state government or in the state code. There is no mechanism to remove them. Even so, if they're gone, there's still going to be a point on HPO Web. It will just say gone. But the basic process is, and I'm going to introduce you to people that are integral in this process that are still in the audience. Looks like I just see two. But anyway, so I get the study list application. Make sure that the instructions were followed, because they are in the application. Basically, we're looking for a good sample of interior and exterior photographs, a map. I should know all this by heart. Is that it? A photo log helps, but I think that's a little much asking from the general public. But because a lot of them will save their photographs based on what is shown in the image, and then when we have to save the files according to our survey file name conventions, we lose all that data. So I basically just copy and paste that onto a Word document, creating a photo log. So once I have all that documentation, I upload it to our network, let the consultant reviewer who will present it to NRAC, they've got a study list application, and I know a lot of staff prefers to make site visits before they even get to this far, but that doesn't always happen. Chandria Birch, who you all know and love, creates she will help you with your proof sheets, but she also maintains the files that she'll create a file if one doesn't exist. Otherwise, she hands off those materials to my girl Friday, that's totally un-PC, but Sharon, who makes sure that I am where I need to be at any given moment in time. So she keeps a tight rein. She's harsh. So if you hear me choking on the phone, you know it's Sharon pulling me to God knows where. Anyway, so sometimes we get them at the last hour. Sometimes we get them with 2 months advance notice. But anyway, it's kind of the first pass at these properties, and it's critical to point out this is not a guarantee of National Register eligibility. It's merely our opinion, and we make that opinion known to the members of the NRSC, and they vote on that before it gets placed on the study list. So that's probably quicker and dirtier than I thought it would be, but again, I don't want to belabor the point, but I just wanted to bring it up because it is something that, it's one of our internal processes that, I don't know, I thought y'all be curious to know about. So any questions about that particular process? Otherwise, I will pass it over to Sarah.
Field any more NR questions?
Amy?
Do you want to field any more NR questions?
Any other National Register questions? Josie?
Procedure question, I'm curious if there's been any discussion about a different timeline for nominations that start coming in with properties that were damaged in Hurricane Helene. I know in Asheville, I'm starting to see and hear about plans to start rebuilding or start nominations. Rebuilding is starting. Time is of the essence. Has any discussion happened yet, or can I hope that it might?
I think so far just the Marshall School that Sybil brought to us, and it was listed despite being covered by an entire floor full of mud. And Marshall was, it was such a cool little downtown street, and I'm glad I got to see it beforehand. It just had a lot of character, really cool vibe to it. And my heart went out to those folks because it was just, shells of buildings and just covered with goop. But,
Josie, are you asking specifically about tax credit? Like,
No, I'm asking prior to that nomination, just timelines.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting a lot of questions from people like, is there any chance that our nomination might be reviewed more quickly? Because time is of the essence, they want to know.
we've been pretty strict about holding to, as they come in.
Yes.
We have been trying to be more flexible on that with moving things forward that are more ready to go. So if a nomination is all set, that it's not necessarily getting hung up behind something that's not more ready to go. But we're still basically first come, first serve. We haven't gotten that question that I know of about anybody trying to press forward with a nomination. So in terms of, now, what I asked about tax credits, in terms of tax credits, they have 30 months to get it listed and still get their tax credit. So we have, I haven't been here that long. I've only been here about 6 years, I think, or 7 years, 6 years. And I've seen one time where our process internally was kind of threatening somebody's tax credit because for a lot of different reasons we were way behind on one particular nomination. And so we did sort of fast track that to make sure we are not going to be the fly in somebody's tax credit ointment if we can help it. Folks want the listing done yesterday when they're doing tax credits, but we try and remind folks they do have that 30-month window, and we're not going to let you miss that. And we're probably going to get you listed way before that. So, in terms of someone wanting to get something listed and they're sort of starting that while they're starting work on the building, you know, it's always difficult, and we've got some fellow consultants here who have successfully done it, to kind of list and work at the same time. And it just requires frequent updating of photographs and sometimes going back in and changing some descriptions. But we can't, you know, it can be done. It's easier if you just go for the listing and don't mess with it until after it's listed. But that's not, you know, to your point, that's not always, I would say we'll probably just take it on a case-by-case basis. Again, we try and work on first come, first serve, but we also don't want to, you know, really screw something up for someone, you know, particularly thinking about that tax credit front. You know, we have, it's more common than I would have ever imagined, but we have consultants who say, my client is 102 years old and they might die any moment, and the last thing they want is this building, this house, this whatever on the National Register. And that pulls at the heartstrings, and we want to move it along faster, but it, you know, it is just important to this other person that their nomination get listed. I mean, everybody's nominations are important to them. For a wide variety of reasons. It could be $1 million tax credit project, or it could be grandma might die tomorrow, and anything in between. And so to just be fair, we try and keep them, you know, keep them in line in the order in which they come. Again, that said, we're also not going to just be totally stone cold and like, well, you're not, you know, so there's certainly flexibility, and if you're running into that, you know, come talk to us, or have your client come talk to us, whichever.
Sort of tangentially related to that, I wonder if SHPO would entertain a policy about photography. Sarah talked about a situation, and I had a similar one where I did not get comments back within the 60-day, and you know, the client was waiting for that, and I didn't have review comments, but that's okay. They started on the tax credit, and I had to go out twice to rephotograph, which were not in my budget. And if I'd gotten review comments within the statutory time frame, we would have gotten it into the nomination process before they'd started doing the work. So can there be a policy that if we don't get review comments back within the time frame, and there's not been a change to the building in the time frame, that SHPO goes and rephotographs? Or that there's some way that there's some understanding that that's unbudgeted work that we're having to do because we didn't get the review comments back in time?
Well, I mean, we are working, like I said, we are working on a policy that will help us to meet that 60-day time frame that you're talking about. Any sort of other subsequent changes that are made to a building while an active rehab is going on, and the building is not yet listed, I can't answer that question. I mean,
that they waited to do work for a couple of months, and then, you know, time is money, you know, we've got financing. And I ended up having to go ahead and reshoot it twice.
The very fastest you're going to get something listed, you know, if and when we make that 60-day review window, and then depending if it's in a CLG or not, there's different front end public notice windows we have to meet for that, and then it has to wait for the National Register Advisory Committee, which only meets 3 times a year. So there's always going to be a pretty big, you know, length of time. I've been measuring, and this is not it's actually not really fair to us, but it's the easiest thing for me to keep up with, is from the time you submit a first draft to the time it goes to NRSC. And it's not fair to us because that includes this time that you might have it and you've gone on vacation to Iceland or whatever you're doing and not working on your nomination. So But that's also the most realistic statistic for you to give your client, is generally how long does it take? That had been in the year to year and a half range. We're down to about 10 months pretty steadily now. So there's just always, and I'm not quite sure how you could get it down to much less than, say, 6 to 8 months. So there's always going to be a window of time. Now, that said, if we really are the problem, the holdup that has created a situation where you're going out to reshoot photographs, and it's because the nomination wasn't done, wasn't listed within, or wasn't to NRSC within kind of 6 or 8 month range, all told, that yeah, we can talk about that.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice to have a policy.
Mm-hmm.
I think the important thing to remember in that regard is that your description and your photos, complement one another.
Yeah, so I have to reshoot it and rewrite it.
Understood. We're trying.
We just had, I'll just also add, we had an interesting conversation, Ramona and I, with Ramona's counterpart in Georgia. And I'm trying to think if there was anyone else, and a developer who does a lot of tax credit projects. And there was someone else on the call from Georgia's office, but I guess kind of maybe sort of my counterpart. And Georgia has a pretty set policy where they're just not going to entertain your nomination while you're doing work. They're not doing it. We would strongly encourage you to also not try to nominate and work at the same time. But we'll do our best to work on that. It's just always got to factor in that it's going to probably require some revamp along the way. Yep.
In terms of the overall schedule, because I've noticed that things have started to go quicker, so I do really appreciate that. And this might be a terrible idea, but we used to have meetings 4 times a year for NRSC.
Uh-huh.
Would shifting back to that, would probably totally disrupt the flow that you already have, but that's a way that things had more opportunity to be heard.
Sharon's head just exploded.
Okay.
Behind her. Like I just saw it happen. It's when we finish one, we're already getting ready for the next one. It's just really, we bat that around occasionally. It's not, I wouldn't say would never do it, but Claudia may be able to speak to a little bit more of how that worked, if it worked well or not. But I kind of feel like there's a reason they went to 3.
We went to 3 for financial reasons, largely.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, by lunch. Okay, so when NRSC comes to town, we buy their lunch, we buy their breakfast, and we pay for their travel and their hotel rooms if they need to spend the night. So it's not cheap. That's why we switched to online when our money was kind of iffy. So particularly, if we wanted to talk about going into all virtual all the time, maybe we could do it 4 times a year a little more easily. But Sharon's head just exploded again.
I'm not saying you should do that, it was just,
yeah.
I think most states meet 3 times a year, some 4. That was mentioned in that email that I was just referring to. But I don't know if Virginia meets 4 times a year, but they've got gobs of boards, and they have boards that just listen to their version of the study list. But that's Virginia. I can say that because that's my mother country. But anyway, I was going to say that, Jim, I don't know whether he said this during the last workshop or has said it since, but, you either want to, if you have an active rehab, wait until after the rehab is done, if it's financially feasible, to submit your nomination. That way, you're presenting the property in its best light. It's been rehabbed, or you get it listed, and then you move forward with your rehab. I know when I first started in this field back in the early 2000s working for Dwayne Anderson, you didn't see the sort of, not necessarily pushback, but just the requirements that lending institutions are, I think, now putting in place, that like they want to see it listed. They're not just going to be happy with assigned part one. But I guess that varies. But anyway, anything else? Well, I want to thank you all for coming, both yesterday and today. Hopefully it's been worth your time just to see us. But again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to call or email me. Our staff list is a very friendly, interactive map. It's fun to play with. So if not, I'll adjourn.
Yep.
Or Sarah can adjourn.
Now, I'll just
She's
say-
the big
I'll just say-
cheese.
I'll just say thank y'all for coming out and for being with us, and we really appreciate all the work y'all do. And I think it's really important for you to take away that y'all are you're actually creating documents and records that are part of, as to use Jeff's word, the canon of North Carolina's architectural history. So go forth and record. So, thank you.
Get to those 102-year-old ladies.